Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to make your acquaintance as always, and welcome to my Abyss guide for the majority of 5.8. Before we get into anything, I want to first say that my voice isn't AI. I got a few comments on the last video asking which AI voice I used. This is my own voice. Well, no one would choose to use a British voice, so I'll try to put in as many flubs as possible. Getting back on topic, this is the last version we'll be facing the same floor 9 and floor 10. With version 6.0, we'll have a fresh abyss, rounding out Nalan abysses with some new and old enemies, and the return of multi-target content on one of the sides. But there's a lot of HP to deal with as usual either way. And lastly, any significant, missing or incorrect notes will be pinned in the top comment. Once again, if you have any thoughts, tips, advice, feel free to add them in the comments to help out people that might not have seen them. If it's about the video and how to improve that, that's always appreciated as well. No general tips as that's a separate video now, so let's go look at the Abyss Blessings and the Ley Line Disorders. The Abyss Blessing is about Hydro reactions this time around, and that obviously benefits Lunar Charge reactions. It obviously also works well for any of the on-banner characters, whether that's Mualani, Chaska, or Silali. There's a lot of archetypes this falls into: Freeze, Vape, Electrocharge, Bloom, Hyper Bloom, etc, etc. Even off-field characters like Shincho, Farina, Yalam will be able to proc it very easily. The classic Hydro drivers from Nervalet to International Child. For the Ley Line Disorders, we have the first ever reaction-specific multiplier buff, which is for Electrocharged and Lunar Charge reactions, gaining 75% damage. Because of the way the Lunar Charged is calculated, that benefits more from this increase than Electrocharge does. We'll say that beyond ineffa, Electrocharge teams are generally a bit niche, but thankfully, because of the content we've got in this abyss, it's a bit more beneficial, so Aoife, Sucrose, Mizuki can use it quite well. So Taser teams aren't exactly the strongest of teams. Second side, we have the classic Night Soul Line damage gets increased by 75% again. This is exactly the same buff that we got last abyss, so Mawika, Chaska, Mualani, Orion can all make great use of this. And now we've gone over the buffs, we can jump right into the first side of Chamber 12-1. The graphic doesn't really do justice of explaining how the enemies spawn. We have two different groups of enemies spawning. The first group will always have two of the smaller Eremites active. The second group will go sequentially through 4 repeating Eremite summoners, the ones with the spirits. So most of the time you'll be fighting 4 enemies at once. The Eremite Desert Clearwater, Eremite Sunfrost, Eremite Day Thunder, the simpler ones are, as I said, simpler. For elemental attacks, you might want to be aware slightly of being frozen. As you get them down to 70% HP, they get some more interruption resistance and will do slightly more dangerous attacks. There are some more very minor mechanics to this, but I won't bother explaining them as you'll have defeated the enemy before they become apparent. Same time, you'll be fighting one of the either Eremite Stone Enchanters or Floral Ring Dancers. The Geo one that summons the Drake, the Dendro one that summons the Serpent. These Serpents, as always, have reduced resistances to the element that they are. They have about 30% of the HP of the Eremite themselves. You defeat the spirit, the Eremite that summons them suffers 37.5% of their current HP, and the higher HP they have, the more damage they take. So likely because you're hitting multiple of them at once, make sure to focus down the summon as well. While the spirit is summoned, the Eremite gets higher interruption resistance and increased resistances to all types of damage. After defeating the spirit, the Eremite gets a reduced resistance to their own element and is stuck in place, paralyzed for 10 seconds, losing all of those earlier resistances as well. The only enemy that gets quite far away from you in this chamber is the Geo Crocodile Summon, and as usual, to stop it leaping away from you, try to stand near it when it appears. While we're here, we should also talk for a moment about the multi-target nature of this. All these enemies spawn pretty close to each other, so if you have someone like Nervalet, you should be easily able to hit them all with one beam. Freeze team will suffer a bit more with this because although Skirt can probably hit multiple of them, I don't know if Escofia's skill has a large enough radius to debuff all of them. Farina's minions will only really be able to hit 1 or 2 at a time, so taking a grouping character can be convenient, but that won't work for freeze teams. Mawika, on the other hand, can just spin on all of them at once. This also kind of enables all those characters that are really proficient in multi-target to rise up once again, like Nilou and Zhao. Caveat to that statement really is that we already have plenty of top tier damage dealers that have enough area to hit all of these enemies because they're placed quite close together. The only problem you'll have is with teams like Overload, which will knock enemies away in sporadic directions, but you can just retry until you happen to group them conveniently. Characters that are exclusively single target, like Yoimiya. The thing I wanted to bring up for this and the next chamber, I guess, is talking about multi-wave. In multi-wave content, when you have lots of enemies spawning after each other and they have low HP, you have to keep in mind that characters that apply debuffs to enemy, like animo characters that swell and reduce their resistances, their debuffs only apply to that enemy, and so when a new one spawns, won't have those debuffs on them. This is where you have weaknesses on characters like Nahida, but strengths on characters like Zhilanen, who don't require anything from the enemies to reduce their resistance. As there's not really any mechanics, and we can talk about teams more in the team section later, let's move on to the second side. The second side, things are back to normal. Single target, we have a fluid avatar of lava, that's the one that self-infuses with pyro, and the Mountain King. Fluid avatar of lava has a constant pyro aura, meaning it'll be really easy to get melts and vaporizers, even overloads on it. Trade-off being that you're not going to be able to get anything but pyro reactions, so you won't be able to debuff the enemy by swirling the element you're doing the damage with. The only troublesome mechanic of the avatar of lava is that it will sometimes burrow and teleport away from you. Stop it from doing that, you can just stand behind it. It's always busy turning to face you, it will never have the opportunity to go and cast this attack where it burrows away. After that, we've got the classic return of the Yomkasaur Mountain King. This time it's on an earlier floor, therefore the HP is a bit lower. As usual, he starts off with those deadly laser beam and big blob of pyro attacks. Make sure to dodge those, especially the third attack. Shortly after, they'll summon 3 flame granites on the floor. If you apply pyro to these flame granites just as he's about to eat them, he'll take 5% true damage. Instead, hit them with pyro and they explode, he'll take a lot more damage. On top of that, you can apply hydro or cryo to the enemy to react these flame granites exploding on the ground, doing even more damage. Oh, and watch out when they explode, as they will knock you back. Fail to ignite at least 2 of them, he'll repeat the same 3 deadly attacks he started the chamber with. You can also use those pyro trails that the earlier deadly attacks applied on the ground to your advantage if you don't have a pyro character in your team. You could use an animo ability that infuses with the element that's on you, like a Kazuha or a Sucrose Burst. You could self-apply an element like Jean's Burst, also applies animo to you, causes you to swirl pyro, or Beto's skill self-applies electro, causing you to overload, and all of those reactions apply pyro near you, causing you to then explode the rest of the flame granites. The most annoying attack the Yomkasaur does is the spinning move, which it does shortly after this flame grate mechanic. It will spin in your direction to the edge of the arena, and if it knocks you back, it can waste a lot of time. Don't try to move away preemptively. Slap his belly before doing this so you can tell when it's about to happen. Try to place abilities like Oz or Guoba, predicting where he's going to end up. More importantly, you can sometimes delay these attacks by making sure to stand behind him. This way he'll waste time turning to face you. Depending on the attack pattern, after about 90 seconds into the chamber, he should perform another attack where they throw a single flame granite onto the ground, can allow you to squeeze in a little more damage. All that said, we can move on to chamber 12 too. On the first side, again, we have multi-target content. This time you'll be facing 3 Ruin Machines at a time. Like last time, the Ruin Machines are heavier, and so moving them is more about knowing their mechanics and manipulating them, rather than using animo characters to group them. Cruisers will dash backwards away from whichever direction you are. The jellyfish don't do anything special, they just hover near you. The destroyers, known as the snakes, can burrow over towards you. These are all Ruin Machines, so you can also hit their weight points when they're exposed to paralyze them for a short duration. After that, you have an annoying combination of 3 Earth Guards. I say annoying, but the mechanics they have aren't too problematic. They will try to, at some point during the fight, absorb the element they've taken the most damage to, and it will increase the resistance to that element by 40%. To stop them doing that when they're doing this mechanic, just hit their head hitbox. This can be done in a lot of ways, it just needs to be about that level. I call them annoying because of the way they might randomly decide to distance themselves. Sometimes they will split apart and slowly walk backwards from each other. So to get them to group, you can move further away from them, get them to charge towards you, and if you intercept them charging, or they charge into each other, they will stop running in the same direction. Same concept applies if they decide to do a charge attack and they're already grouped. As long as you stand in front of them and intercept them, then they won't duck halfway across the arena. Manipulating the enemy movement to stay together can be quite important and crucial to clearing on time in this chamber. An enemy's really far away from you, try to move further away from it to get it to move closer, or if it's moving backwards, then try to turn it around to move backwards into the other enemy. You get the idea. The second side, we have another pyro-resistant enemy followed by a dendro-resistant boss. We're starting off with the Pyro Wyob Manifestation, which as always has 50% resistance to the element that they are. As they're right at the start of the chamber, you should make sure in the previous chamber to gather the energy you need to be able to burst at the start of this one. Have about 5 seconds to cast all those bursts before it creates that energy draining arena and summons that big ward on itself. The drain only affects energy, so MalWiCat and Skirk aren't affected by this, and also delay or stop it from doing this mechanic by keeping it continually frozen, or staggering it using this series of characters, but staggering it is really hard and I won't go in depth onto that. Then have about 13 seconds to break this wipe ward. Extra damage you get from reactions like Vaporize or Melt won't affect this shield, but all the characters within the arena will have their damage boosted by 120%, and that goes to 180 for any Night Solar line damage. The ward is worth about 112% of the Wyob's max HP. Don't break the white ward, for whatever of the ward was remaining, that will get converted into a pyro ward. This will be worth a maximum of 48 units, and so even if you know you can't break the white ward, you can still just bring hydro characters or electro characters or something that you know will be able to break this pyro ward afterwards. If you manage to break the white shield, you'll get a bunch of energy back that should restore all of your characters' bursts. Whoever collects the energy will get more value from it. Either way, when you break the pyro or the white ward, it will then become paralyzed for about 5 seconds. Second enemy you're facing is the Jade Plume Terrorshroom. As far as bosses go, this is one of the simpler ones. Starts off with 25% resistance, and hitting it with Electro increases a meter it has by 2%. Electro-Dendro reactions like Catalyze increase it by 15%. So you have that meter full, it will become activated and do an aggressive attack, whether that's its head swings or charging off to the arena and then charging back to the center. Either way, it will become exhausted for about 15 seconds afterwards, become paralyzed, and lose 25% resistance to all damage types. As this is only 25% resistance, it's not really that significant to do this mechanic, so any hits of Pyro will reduce the meter by about a third. If you have Pyro in your party, just ignore this mechanic altogether. Instead, they'll summon some extra floating fungi, but they're not very dangerous at all. Nor do you have to defeat them to end the chamber. Next enemy, and the first one in Chamber 12-3, should be one you're hopefully pretty familiar with now after Stygian Onslaught, as it's the return of the Cactus, otherwise known as the last survivor of Tenoch-Zitok. I think that's how you say it? I'm probably saying it wrong. Anyway, very soon into combat, after about 5 seconds, you do have time to very briefly damage it, it will hide and become 3 hats. Possess one of these hats in particular, then become invulnerable. The first few seconds you can cast abilities on it. For example, casting Nervlet's skill generates his orbs because there's something to target. As soon as it's turned into the hats, it becomes invulnerable for a brief period and you can't do that anymore. But this, when it changes form, it becomes a different enemy. Therefore, if you have Arlecchino's mark on it, that mark will just disappear. Hats will then swap somewhat randomly. Sometimes the hat that he's possessed will never swap, sometimes it will swap multiple times, but you can normally tell which one he's swapped to by a number of different things. First of all, the one that he is, that moves around, has a golden trail behind it. And when it does its ring attacks later, they also have a golden brim to them. Other than that, the one that you need to target should have a mustache on it, make somewhat comedically pained sounds when you're hitting it. This hat mechanic, it will go through 2 rounds of every slap hamming. I didn't do that on purpose, I mean hat slamming, then it will do 1 swap, and so just 2 of the hats will swap, another 2 rounds of slams, another swap, another 2 rounds of slams, and then it will be the end of the mechanic, and he will do a big area-wide damage if you haven't broken the ward by this point, as all of these hats will have a white ward on them and little meters above their heads. Oh, and the slam attack has a knockback to it, so you might want some shielding or interruption resist of some kind. White ward on the hat is worth 40% of the boss's HP. White ward has some special features to it. It takes 300% damage from Electro Charge and Lunar Charge, so again, Lunar Charge gets more value from this, and it has 135 resistance to all elements while it's in this hat form, apart from Hydro and Electro. Triggering a Lunar Charge in turn, which occurs less often, will increase it by 40%. You need 3 Lunar Charges or 5 Electro Charge to fill up this meter to the max. When you fill up this meter to the max, the ward will instantly take 22.5% of its max health as true damage. Ward is recording all of the Hydro, Electro, Lunar Charge, Electro Charge damage it's taking, but this extra meter breaking amount doesn't count towards that damage. On top of that, some of Ineffa's damage is direct Lunar Charge damage, so it's counted as Lunar Charge damage even though it's coming from her and it's not a reaction thing. That also counts towards filling up that meter. He's able to fill it up extra fast. Also, if you're accidentally targeting the wrong hat, if you damage it at all, that ward won't go down. If you fill up the meter, nothing will happen. As I mentioned, it's recording all of this damage it's taking, and when you finally manage to break the ward on this hat, that damage gets instantly transferred to the Cactus themselves. Either have the option of solving this mechanic by triggering lots of reactions and filling up that meter really fast, or simply doing a lot of Electro or Hydro damage, because that will break the ward. After you manage to break the ward, the Cactus will be weakened for about 15 seconds, so they'll be paralyzed, and all of their resistances will be dropped down all the way to -90. That's incredibly low resistance. Means that resistant shred on them is kind of redundant at this point, because it's buffing your damage by such a small amount, because the less resistance an enemy has, the less resistant shred does for you. On an enemy with 10 resistance, shredding their resistance with Viridescent, so for 40%, will increase your damage by about 30%, a little less than that. In comparison, shredding an enemy's resistance by 40% when they already have -90 is only increasing your damage by about 14%. About half the value you'd normally be getting. Lastly, once he's finished this weaken mechanic, he will then perform the Hat Toss attack. Here again, you can fill up the meter on them. An Electro Charge proc does about 7%, and so does a Lunar Charge proc. And you're just guesstimating these from pixel comparison, so it's not data mined or very accurate. If you manage to fill up this meter before they move on, they seem to delay their attack and instead do another Hat Slam attack. It's a brief amount of extra time, but it is an extra window you get rewarded for doing the mechanic. After this, they'll go back to the hat attack and cycle all around again. Last boss is one we're welcoming back, the Secret Source Automaton configuration device, which I don't mind as much anymore now that I learned the tech for it. Secret Source Automaton starts off at pretty high natural resistance at 60%, meaning resistant shred is quite valuable for it. The main mechanic happens after about 30 to 40 seconds or 2 to 3 attacks. If you have some characters that can enter the Night Soul Blessing state on your team, even if they're off-field, this will fill up the adaptive countermeasures meter, the meter by its name. Once this is filled up, it will cause the main mechanic to trigger, and this can reduce the amount of time it takes to get to it by a considerable amount, up to like 20 seconds. Having multiple characters in the Night Soul Blessing state will charge us even faster, but there won't be that much difference between 1 unit and 4, as long as you can spend 14 seconds at least in the Night Soul state, which will fill up the bar enough on its own. Someone like Pyro character can only be in the Night Soul state for 13 seconds, so you'll always need at least 2 skills to activate it, which can end up being quite slow. So it doesn't matter where you are in the chamber to affect this, you can be out by the edge or really close. If you do fulfill this mechanic and fill up the meter, it will always then perform an attack where it moves to the side of the arena and draws 2 sets of parallel lines. You can use those corners of the parallel lines to judge where it's going to spawn the pillars, as they'll always spawn at the 2 corners towards the center of the arena. And if the automaton's about to finish an attack and you fill up the adaptive countermeasures meter, it will then also perform this parallel line attack, which it wouldn't do otherwise. This can delay the main mechanic further, so either be very fast about it or wait for the mechanic without doing Night Soul, but just don't do both at the same time. Along with that, if you do fill up the meter, it will instantly cancel whichever attack it's currently doing. Some characters like Veressa and Gillinan, which can wait around in Night Soul mode for periods of time when they're not meant to really if they're doing the regular rotation. So you can do specific things to get characters in the Night Soul Blessing state for longer. During this main mechanic, the automaton will move over to one side of the arena, the opposite side it will summon 2 phlogiston pillars, with a node at the top of each. Each node has a barrier surrounding it, meaning you can't use ranged attacks to destroy the cores, and so the only way of breaking them is by climbing up, standing on top of the pillars, and then attacking the core. I'll put a tier list up now of some of the characters that can conveniently climb the pillars, but I've also made a really long video showing all the characters that can and the ways that they can do it. On this, the most important thing to know is that any character can climb it, apart from the tall female model, if you search for the particular ledge or little spot on the pillar to climb up. It's definitely harder to do than just using like a Gillinan skill to ascend the side, but it does mean that any team is able to complete this mechanic, whether they have a Natlan character or not. In fact, characters like Ian-san, who's a Natlan character, doesn't have anything in their kit that lets them ascend the pillar. They can move fast horizontally, not vertically. Also, during this mechanic, while it's going on, 2 lasers will be trying to hit you for the duration of this mechanic, creating puddles of electro on the ground which will then continue to do damage to you. So if you don't get elevated quickly, it can be quite deadly. You have about 12 seconds to complete this mechanic, otherwise a large area-wide attack will hit you. After breaking the 2 cores successfully, the automaton will lose 15% of its max HP, and its resistances will then fall all the way to -60. Have 15 seconds to do as much damage as you can. The note here is that you'll want to maximize the damage that you can do in this vulnerable phase. So if there's abilities you can cast before breaking the pillars, like maybe you want to attack the automaton to make sure it has a certain element on it, or you can use Chevras's skill by standing next to one of the nodes and shooting the automaton, and that counts. I think to squeeze out a bit more damage in this weakened phase. The difference of 90 resistance is pretty big. After this weakened phase, it will start the mechanic all over again, and so having multiple characters that can be in that Night Soul Blessing state is more valuable because you're going through this mechanic multiple times. And that should be everything for the automaton and this final Natlan Abyss. We can finally move on to teams, and as always there's plenty of great options out there for example runs, and the ones that I want to give are only kind of in my opinion, so they're not absolutely the limits of teams you can take. There's always other ideas, there's always characters you can play at different investments. These are just the ones that I find fun to play or convenient to play, considering the mechanics that the enemies have given us. So on the first side, all of the constraints we have are that the Blessing is giving us or encouraging us to use Hydro reactions, the Ley Line is encouraging us to use Electrocharged or Lunar-charged reactions. The Eremites, the Rune Machines, are both multi-target, so I'd like characters that can hit multiple enemies. And lastly, we have the Cactus for Electrocharged, either Hydro damage or Electro damage, one of those 3. That's all the constraints that really exist. It's not a complicated half. I guess it's just that we don't get multi-target content very often, and so when we do, they make it a bit simpler so a lot of teams have access to it. And so the best team, which is going to fulfill hitting lots of enemies, all 3 of Lunar Charge damage, Hydro damage, and Electro damage, is going to be one of those teams with ineffa in. Surprise, it's the banner character. Yeah, well that's what they do for Abyss, they push the banner characters. And so any driver that works really well with ineffa, from Sethos to Nervalet to Chlorine, Veressa, any of those will be pretty good in this. The other side, if you don't have or want ineffa, there's lots of other options. You can run an electro-focused team. Something like Veressa Overload is a great example, or Overload teams in general. As long as you have an electro damage dealer, they should be able to break the wards on the hats easy enough, and all of that electro damage they're doing will get transferred, so characters with an extreme focus on electro damage and hyper carries will benefit a lot more than characters with a more spread damage amount, and it's diversified over multiple elements. Along the same avenue, but in the other direction, you can have a team that's solely focused on Hydro damage, whether that's a Vaporized team with someone like Mualani or Child. Could throw in some kind of Hydro core to carry you through. Maybe something like Yalan with Farina will have enough damage to break the hats, as it's only Abyss, not Stygian Onslaught. Of course, you can have Hydro hyper carries like Nervalet on their own with Farina, Jilina, and Kazaha doing all that damage. The other avenue to go down is to use electro charge or lunar charge reactions to complete that mechanic instead of specifically doing elemental damage. Playing something like an Overvape team where you have Hydro, Electro and Pyro, and that Pyro character is getting vaporizers, whether that's on fielding someone like Ineffa with Bennett's Pyro infusion to get extra damage from all of the attack and elemental mastery she's building, or someone like Arakino to just wail on it when it's in the weakened phase after using something like Fischl and Jinchol to break that ward. Same kind of concept applies to Hyperbloom teams. You could use an Electro character and 2 Hydro characters to get all of those Lunar charges, and then once they're weakened you can switch to Nahida and get lots of Hyperblooms by on-fielding her. The second side, on the other hand, has more constraints, but they're less effective. Basically, you start off again with Hydro reactions, but instead now the Ley Line is wanting us to play characters that do Night Soul aligned damage. It's all very single target, and the resistances here are mainly Dendro and Pyro. Avatar of Lava would like us to do Hydro or Cryo damage to get those free reactions. The Mountain King would like us to bring a bit of Pyro or some way of triggering some Pyro to break those seeds, and then also maybe having some Hydro or Cryo to get the extra reactions of those granites. To that you have the Wyob, so you don't want your team to be super burst reliant ideally, and then the Terrorshroom, which wants you to bring Electro and then not Pyro? Lastly, you have the Automaton, which again encourages characters that can enter the Night Soul Blessing state, so Natlan characters, and you need some way of completing the mechanic, but as we mentioned in that section, there's lots of characters that can complete the mechanic. The thing about this side is that the bosses are kind of contrived. The Yomkasaur wants you to bring Pyro for the mechanic, but the Terrorshroom doesn't want you to bring Pyro for the mechanic. And so because the mechanic that's least impactful is the Terrorshrooms, you're only reducing that resistance by 25%, and it already has pretty low resistance of 25%, that's pretty much the one that you want to skip out on and not complete. Meaning, Electro characters aren't encouraged and you're happy to take Pyro characters, which makes the side a lot easier. So as long as you're not bringing Dendro and you have a bit of Pyro, that's really it. So the constraints of this side are nowhere near as significant as they first appear. It means this side will support a lot of teams as long as it's not mainly Dendro damage. So preferably not Pyro damage, but that's purely because of the resistances more than anything else. This means a team that does Night Soul damage and brings a little bit of Pyro will be good, which is Mualani surprisingly. Mualani does really well on this side. She likes the little bit of Pyro application for the Yomkasaur. She herself is even able to climb the Phlogiston pillars by getting Sharky to jump while heading towards one. And she also gets that bonus damage against the Wyob and is not burst reliant, so that's easier for her. But along the same lines of making the most of the Avatar of Lava, getting a bit of Pyro in their teams, Wriothesley in a reverse melt team works perfectly fine, especially if he's then supported by Mawika and Jillanen, as they're some of his best slots in his reverse melt team, and that enables him to complete that last mechanic for the Automaton super easily. Just also miss out on the Hydro reactions, but if you're doing someone like Chaska, you can put Farina in the team and get Hydro reactions from them. Chaska spends a good amount of time in the Night Soul Blessing state and does lots of Night Soul line damage, so she should be great here too. Yes, I know I did just list both of the banner characters, but I think it's mainly because this side is pretty open. You can run a whole variety of teams. You could run Clorand with Eon-san in an Overload team. You would probably be fine with Arakino with Sitlali in a Melt team. Because although the Avatar of Lava does have higher Pyro resistance, if you swirl it, you'll always get a Pyro swirl, so you'll be easily able to reduce its resistances by a good amount. Therefore, second side, you have a lot of options. I'd say more options than the first side. It's super flexible, so I'm not going to go through and list a lot more teams here. Hopefully, with the information I've given you, you can make your own assumptions for your account what will be good. And if you're like, well, Watchful, I want really specific advice based on my account and the characters I have, well, you're welcome to ask about stuff like that in the Discord. It's plug time, it's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching all the way through. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. If you found this useful, as always, feel free to send it to a friend or someone else, or you enjoyed this content and you want more endgame content, because I make sure to cover Stygian, Abyss, Imagium Theatre when they reset, which includes me staying up till like 10 AM all night editing the video to get it out as soon as possible so that you guys can use it. Either way, thank you for the tremendous support over the past few months. If there's any other notes, feel free to comment below, or any changes or anything I missed. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Bye bye!